Every school, college, or work collective knows its own version of the urban legend. In one such place, where a group of friends had just completed their freshman year, the conversations at the party quickly turned to discussing that there was an abandoned building nearby. Not just any warehouse or old house, but a former psychiatric hospital. The building was rumored to have been closed decades ago after a series of scandals. It stood on a hill surrounded by a dilapidated fence covered with ivy. The huge windows on the ground floor were boarded up, and above them there were gaping black holes, like eyes staring at the city below. Locals often told how someone heard strange noises at night, saw flashing lights in the corridors, or, even worse, met people there who clearly should not have been in such a place. For most, these stories were nothing more than an attempt to cause fear in teenagers who like to climb dangerous places. But not for Sam, Jess, Kyle, and Mike. For them, it was an invitation, a challenge, to prove that it was just a rumor. At the party on Friday, they quickly agreed they would go there the next night. The weapon of their choice? Flashlights, phones, and cameras. Jess insisted that they should take everything with them to document the truth. She was the kind of person who posted every little thing on social media, and an adventure like this would be the perfect content. "We'll just check it out," Sam said to calm Jess down. "If it gets too scary, we'll leave right away." Too scary? Mike teased him, who liked to act like the bravest person in the company. "Are you afraid of ghosts, Sammy?" Sam snorted, but his look betrayed that deep down he wasn't as confident as the others. Kyle, as always, remained the calmest of them all. He just shrugged his shoulders. "It's just an old building. We will examine him and return home." The next evening they met at the intersection leading to the hill where the building stood. Everyone had their own role. Mike carried a backpack with tools and water, Jess turned on the camera, commenting on each step, and Kyle and Sam walked ahead, lighting the way. The road to the building was strangely quiet. Usually you could hear the sounds of insects or rustling from the forest, but that night everything seemed to be frozen. When the group reached the gate, Mike tried to open it, but the hinges were rusty and the gate wouldn't budge. "Okay, through the side entrance," Kyle suggested, remembering that they had written on the internet about a hole in the fence. They found her pretty quickly. The peeling mesh allowed them to pass one by one, and then to the back of the building. Here, the walls were overgrown with mold, and the air became humid and cold. "Look at this," Jess whispered, pointing at the graffiti on the wall. The caption read, "The outside is better than the inside. Ask those who didn't come out." Mike laughed, of course. Someone likes to scare children. The door leading inside was open. Sam pushed it open, and the old hinges made a high-pitched squeak. They turned on their flashlights, and the narrow corridor was illuminated with dim light. Inside, everything looked even more creepy than they expected. Faded posters with motivational slogans have been preserved on the walls. One of them depicted a family hugging a man in hospital clothes, with the inscription, "We are treating you so that you can live." Treated, Mike chuckled, until it was closed. Kyle suddenly stopped and raised his hand, calling for silence. "Did you hear that?" Jess lifted the camera, filming the surrounding area, and whispered, "What is it exactly?" "It's like someone's footsteps, but very slow." "It's probably just an echo from us," Sam suggested. They continued to explore, but everyone felt that the building seemed to be getting colder by the second. At some point, Jess noticed a door with a sign, "Secret Documentation." She insisted that they open it. Behind the door was a room with archives, dusty shelves full of folders. This place seemed to be untouched, unlike the rest of the building. Jess took one of the folders and opened it. She let out a disappointed sigh. "Just some medical records." Kyle flipped through a few pages and said, "Wait, there's something about experimenting on patients. They tried to burn aggression out of some patients with chemistry." "Burn out the aggression?" Mike asked. "It sounds like nonsense." "Maybe that's why they closed this place," Jess suggested, continuing to film. Next on the shelf was a stack of battered notebooks. One of them was signed simply, "Staff Records, Confidential." Jess began to read. The doctors protested, but the administration insisted on continuing. The patients began to have terrible side effects, uncontrolled aggression, hallucinations, and, worst of all, full awareness of what was happening to them. Some tried to escape, but we couldn't let that happen. We lost another one last night. I think the end will come soon. And now I'm really uncomfortable, Jess said. But that was just the beginning. When Jess finished reading the excerpt from the notebook, there was an oppressive silence in the room. Mike tried to defuse the situation. It's just a story. Someone wrote it for drama. Okay, we've looked at the archives. Now let's go down to the basement. They say there was a room for particularly dangerous patients. Do you really want to go down there? Jess looked around at everyone, still clutching the camera in her hands. Why not? We're already here. It's all for you, Jess. Content, remember? The others reluctantly agreed. They returned to the hallway, where they found a staircase leading down. The handrails were cold to the touch, and there were spots on the steps that looked like dried rust. I wonder if it's blood? Sam asked quietly, but no one answered. When they descended, the air became even colder. The floor was covered with dirt, the walls were overgrown with mold, and the light of flashlights barely illuminated the enclosed space. The basement turned out to be much larger than expected. Narrow corridors branched off like a maze, and ward numbers were visible on the doors. "Wow," Kyle whispered, looking at one of the doors. The inscription was stamped on the metal surface, "Patient 83. High level of aggression. A special regime." "It's like in a horror movie," Mike chuckled, opening the door. Inside was a small room with a bed chained to the floor and a worn mirror on the wall. There were torn strips of cloth on the floor, probably once a straitjacket. Did people really live here? Jess asked in disgust, filming everything on camera. Sam lit up the mirror and noticed that someone had written words on its surface. They were barely noticeable, as if written with a finger in the dirt. No one should have come here. "Okay, now I'm getting creepy," he said, stepping back. "Coward," Mike laughed. But as they went deeper into the basement, the friends began to notice something else. All the doors here were locked from the inside. How is this possible? Kyle touched one of the handles, but it didn't move. "Maybe the doors are jammed," Mike suggested, although even his voice sounded less confident. At the end of one of the corridors, they came across a strange room. It was a large room with several operating tables. Rusty lamps hung above each of them, and something glittered under one of the tables. "Look," Mike pointed at the metal object. It was a scalpel. It looked too new to just stay here for decades. "Someone was here recently," Kyle remarked. Jess started to panic. "We have to leave. Right now." But Mike, as usual, insisted on looking around the room. He walked over to the table and turned over the rag that was lying on it. "I found myself under it, a child's backpack." "What is it?" Jess came closer. Mike opened his backpack, and notebooks, a lunchbox, and a phone with a cracked screen fell out of it. "These are some kid stuff," Sam breathed. "But why was he here?" Jess asked, clutching at her hair. Mike suddenly tensed up. He was holding a folded piece of paper in his hands. Unfolding it, he read aloud. "If you're reading this, then you're already here. Please don't repeat our mistake. Don't trust anyone. Leave before it's too late." "Who wrote this?" Kyle looked around as if expecting to see the author. There was no answer. Sam suddenly noticed that the lamps began to swing, although there was no wind in the room. "This is definitely the place for the video," Mike tried to say, but his voice broke when they heard a loud creaking somewhere in the distance. What was that? Jess froze, gripping the camera tighter. Probably the wind. Or maybe something fell. "Calm down," Mike said, but his trembling hands betrayed fear. Deciding that this was a sign to leave, they headed back to the stairs. However, as soon as they left the room, it became clear that the way back was somehow different. The corridors seemed to have changed. "Are we sure we went this way?" Sam asked. "I don't know, but let's just move," Kyle said, holding the flashlight in front of him. They found another staircase, but it did not lead up, but on the contrary, further down. "That's impossible," Jess said. "We were going in a different direction." "Just let's go," Mike tried to keep his cool, but there was already panic in his voice. Eventually, they found another door, which, oddly enough, was ajar. There was a warehouse behind it. There were bandages, medicines, and something on the shelves that had obviously been spoiled for a long time. And that's when they heard the scariest thing. Loud footsteps, muffled outside the walls. They stopped and looked at each other. "There's someone there," Jess whispered. "It's probably another stalker," Mike suggested. But the footsteps didn't come any closer. Instead, they started coming from two sides. "They're all around us," Kyle breathed. The friends ran, throwing everything except the flashlights. The noise behind them was getting louder, but I didn't have the courage to turn around. At the end of the corridor, they found an exit leading to another corridor, and this time there was a door in front of them with an inscription, "Emergency Exit." The door opened, but instead of leaving, another flight of stairs was waiting for them. Leading up, the friends, almost without speaking, rushed up the stairs. Every step sounded in their ears, as if their hearts were beating in unison. The staircase seemed to be endless, and the rusty railing could barely withstand the grip. Jess struggled to hold the camera in one hand, clutching the flashlight in the other. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Finally, the stairs ended and they found themselves in front of a heavy metal door. "Come on, push!" shouted Mike, already panting from fear and fatigue. Kyle and Sam did their best to open the door. A room filled with shelves of dusty archives opened up in front of them. "This is not the way out," Jess gasped, her voice breaking on the verge of hysteria. "Just a second. Maybe this is the way up," Mike tried to justify himself, looking around the room. But there was something strange in the room. There were fresh clothes on the floor, and a half-empty bottle of water stood next to it. "Someone was here quite recently," Sam quietly remarked, feeling the hairs on his neck stand on end. "Maybe they know a way out," Kyle said. "Or they're just like us and stuck here," Jess replied, clutching her head. Suddenly, footsteps were heard again somewhere in the corridor. They sounded louder now, as if someone had deliberately knocked their feet on the floor. "Quiet," Mike motioned for everyone to lean against the wall. They turned off the flashlights, and the room was plunged into almost absolute darkness. Only a faint light shone through the cracks in the doors. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Jess could barely breathe, feeling her heart pounding in her throat. Someone took hold of the handle. "Hold the door," Mike hissed, but before anyone could move, the pen began to move slowly. "Who's there?" Sam shouted, taking off. The door swung open. Cold air rushed into the room, but there was no one outside. "This is too much," Jess breathed, trying to control her panic. Mike pointed the flashlight into the hallway, illuminating only the empty walls. "It's the wind," he tried to justify himself, but he didn't believe it himself. "It wasn't the wind, Mike. Someone was trying to get in," Jess said sharply. They heard the noise again, but this time it wasn't footsteps. It was a grinding noise. It was like someone was scratching the walls with claws or metal objects. "Let's go." "Right now," Kyle said, grabbing Jess's hand. But as soon as they went out into the corridor, the noise increased. The sound came from everywhere, as if the walls of this place had come to life and were trying to catch them. They ran without taking the road apart. The corridors seemed to be closing in, leading them deeper into this place. At one of the forks, Jess stopped, her breathing ragged. "Wait, where's Mike?" Everyone turned around. Mike was nowhere to be found. "He was running after us," Sam exclaimed. "We need to go back for him," Jess said, her voice full of desperation. "No, we won't find him. We need to move on," Kyle replied, grabbing her shoulder. "Are you crazy?" she screamed, struggling. At that moment, they heard a scream. It was Mike. His voice echoed through the corridors, full of horror. Without thinking, Jess ran back. "Damn it, Jess, stop!" Kyle shouted, but she had already disappeared into the darkness. Kyle and Sam exchanged glances. They had no choice. They followed her. The corridors have changed again. What seemed like a simple path a few minutes ago has now become an endless maze. Eventually, they found Mike. He was lying on the floor, his body was bloody, and his eyes were wide open from shock. "Mike!" Jess screamed, falling to her knees next to him. He raised his hand with difficulty, trying to say something. "Go away. Don't let them take you," he whispered before his hand fell powerlessly to the floor. Sam and Kyle pulled Jess, trying to get her away from Mike's body, but her scream drowned out everything. "This is not the place for us," Sam shouted. Pointing ahead, they ran again, not understanding the way. But the place seemed to be set against them. The corridors were getting narrower. The air was getting thick. Finally, they saw a faint light ahead. That was the way out. "Run!" shouted Kyle. But when they got to the door, it couldn't be opened. There was a sign on the door. No exit. Footsteps sounded from behind. This time they were closer, and it seemed that someone or something was already practically breathing down their backs. Footsteps were coming closer from behind. The hearts of the friends were pounding in unison, and every breath was difficult. They pushed the locked door, but nothing happened. "Jess, help me!" Kyle shouted, pressing his whole body against the cold metal. Jess, still shaken by Mike's death, jumped up and joined in. The three of them tried to break down the door as the footsteps got closer. Almost, Sam managed, and at that moment the door abruptly opened. The three friends fell out, feeling the fresh air on their faces. They found themselves outside, under the bright stars. The silhouette of an abandoned building was visible behind. "We did it," whispered Jess, looking around. But their joy did not last long. Headlights appeared on the horizon, and a white van pulled up to them. He stopped at the very exit, and two men in uniforms resembling security personnel got out of it. "What are you doing here?" one of them asked sharply. We're stuck there. Inside. Jess gasped, trying to explain. "Sam, Kyle, it's okay," a third voice suddenly rang out. They turned around and saw Mike, alive, whole and completely calm. "Mike?" Everyone exhaled at the same time. "What are you? How?" Jess began, but her voice was shaking with a mixture of anger and horror. Mike came closer, his face strangely calm. "Everything is under control. It was a test." "What kind of test?" Sam shouted, his voice cutting through the night silence. "An experiment," Mike replied dryly. "You have been selected for testing. All this is a simulation. Cameras, recordings, sounds. You did it. Congratulations." Jess shook her head, backing away. This is a joke, right? Did you use us?" Kyle stepped forward, grabbing Mike by the front of his shirt. "Are you serious? Mike, we thought you were dead. Did you see what we went through?" Mike looked at him coldly. "All for the sake of science. Behavior under pressure, stressful situations, survival dynamics. It's not personal." Jess burst into tears, her hands shaking. She couldn't believe what was happening. Sam looked at the guards. "Are you participating too? Did you arrange all this?" One of them nodded silently. Kyle let go of Mike, his face contorted with rage. "You sick bastard. You will receive compensation, Mike said, straightening his clothes. It was necessary. Jess stepped forward, her voice filled with cold anger. Compensation? Do you think money will fix it? Do you think we'll just walk away and forget? Mike smiled, his face almost inhuman in the dim headlights. You have no idea how many people have already been through this. And you know what? Everyone forgets. No, we won't forget, Kyle said, his voice firm. Well, Mike shrugged. You are free. You can go now. Sam, Jess, and Kyle looked at each other in silence. They understood that this exit was not the end.